Okay, it's lore time for Beneath Swan Lake. I freaking love lore. I love reading things about like reimagined fairy tales or mythology, anything along those lines. I like reading reimaginings and like the real original versions of the stories. I like hearing those versus what the creator comes up with. So this is my most favorite thing. It is like my hobby. Even if these aren't my best-selling books, they are my most fun ones to research and read. So Beneath Swan Lake is book 2. It picks up immediately after book 1. It literally goes back to what Rapunzel's doing during the final chapter of Down from the Tower, and then jumps back to the scene that we leave in chapter 34 of Down from the Tower. So it's an immediate pickup. There's no gap. I think between this book and book 3 there's going to be like a tiny gap, but nothing crazy. Not years, maybe weeks, something little like that. So Beneath Swan Lake follows the story of Odette and Raimundo. They are the Swan Princess, and then Raimundo is a Grim Reaper. He's the Clover Grim Reaper that will all be explained later on. But he's also the son of Dahlia, and Dahlia is the old lady that lives in a shoe. If you don't know anything about the old lady that lives in the shoe, it's tied to the story of Jack and the Giant Beanstalk. Essentially, the old lady is the wife of a man who buys the magic beans, and then his story happens. But the old lady that lives in the shoe is the mother of 17 children, and she starts the shoe. I think there's some stories about it becoming like a tavern or a stopover to support her family when her husband goes on this journey and gets snatched up by a giant. Where the stories overlap, typically she is taking care of the 17 children. The husband is up in the beanstalk area with the giant, and while he is missing, the oldest son decides to go and look for him. He goes to find the dad. They fight the giant. The giant leaves behind a shoe. They take the shoe and turn it into the tavern or their home, whatever version you're reading. And then the giant is slain, and Jack's father in the story comes back to live with the old lady in the shoe. That's one variation. And that's like a look at how those two stories tie together. In my version, we mostly look over the old lady who lives in the shoe. We talk a little bit about it. Ray gives us some background into his family. They kind of have a heart-to-heart. It doesn't talk a lot about the Jack and the Giant Beanstalk side. Spoiler, it will a little in book 3. It is mentioned somewhat in here, and we do get some insight into Dahlia and a couple of his siblings. I don't name all 17, but we name the important ones. So you do get to learn a little bit about them and a little bit about Ray's father and the lore behind that. There's some like quirky Easter eggs that you can find if you know anything about those stories. So it's a fun tie-in, and his story will continue on into book 3 a little bit from where this one leaves off. And then we have Odette. So when I originally did these books, I wanted them all to be Grimm's fairy tales because I like Grimm's fairy tales, and Hans Christian Andersen has all of his fairy tales, and they don't really overlap until you get more into the modern era. The Hans Christian Andersen are more England, United Kingdom, that kind of area, maybe some French. Grimm's was mostly German and like Slovakia, those kinds of areas. And Grimm's were the two brothers. There's a whole bunch of lore about them too, but originally they were two brothers who wrote fairy tales, who wrote the myths down from stories they heard from people who were traveling or stories they made up. They recorded them. It became the Grimm's fairy tales. It's all very lore, fun fairy tales, that type of thing. But Swan Lake is not a Grimm's fairy tale. I don't know why I thought it was originally a Grimm's fairy tale. Because I was a ballerina for 20 years, so I should know that it was a ballet, originally a Russian ballet by Tchaikovsky, I think is how you say it. and it follows the traditional Swan Princess betrayal, turns into the Black Swan, all that stuff. It's Swan Princess. Um, the Grimm's fairy tale version that I kind of sort of tied into here, it's very loose, is called, I think it's called the Six Swans is the correct term. And the Six Swans is essentially a story about a kingdom where the king's wife dies. He gets remarried to this essentially a hag who has a child with him, but she doesn't want him to have anyone to love but her. She doesn't want any of his attention taken away. And the king had 6 sons before the youngest was born. When the youngest is born, the queen decides to try and get rid of her so that all the attention stays on her. And she tries to curse all the children so that they turn into these swans and are gone. And the king doesn't have any association with them anymore. The little daughter, make sure I'm getting this right. I did get my lore a little messed up. So the king's new wife is someone he meets because he crosses an old spinster in the woods, and she says, I have a beautiful daughter, you should make her your bride. And he already has 7 children, the 6 sons, and then the daughter. I feel like I got way distracted into what the lore of this was supposed to be. Anyway, there are 7 children. And the king decides that the queen, the stepmom, might not be kind to these children. So he takes them all into the woods, all 7 of them, and takes them to a magic cabin that no one knows the way to. And there's a clue of yarn that's magical. And when you unroll it, it leads you to this magical place. Well, he goes out on a hunt one day, and the stepmom is like, where are all the kids? So she discovers where the clue is. She rolls it out, she follows it to where the children are. Essentially, the new queenie, the stepmom, doesn't know about these 7 children, how many he has, just that there are children. And when she discovers them, she has magical properties from Spinster Mommy that was a witch, and she designs these enchanted shirts that when the wearer has it on, it turns them into a swan. So she has a handful. It doesn't explain why, but she has a handful of them. And when she discovers the children, she throws the shirt on each one at a time. And as the shirt slides over them, they are transformed into the swans. Well, the 6 brothers go out and the little girl doesn't. So Queenie has no idea that she exists, and she goes on her merry way back home thinking that all her problems are solved. When the king comes to visit next, he asks, where are thy brothers? And she goes, oh, the queen has ruined our lives. So the unchanged sister, after she tells daddy what happened, they find feathers, and the king has to return home, but the sister goes in search of all her brothers because she can't go home yet. And she finds them and lays in a house with them as birds and is grieving and is sad, and discovers that once every month for a quarter of an hour during the full moon, they can change back to human, but that's all they get. And she's like, but why? What can I do for you? And they tell her that the work would be too hard for her because for 6 whole years she can neither smile nor talk nor laugh at anything, and if she manages to do that, then the spell will be broken. She has to also sew these little shirts of, what is it called? Aster flowers that will help transform them back. And if she can manage all this, the quarter of the hour comes to an end. At the end of their tale, they transform back, and she knows what she must do. She is currently staying in a robber's hut. That's where all the brothers flew to when they changed. And more chaos ensues. So after she's done talking to her brothers, she goes into a tree to get the aster flowers. And the robbers whose hut they were all hiding in reappear. They get tired of waiting for her to come down from the tree. And they go grab her, and they decide to take her to the king of their land. Not her dad, a different king, apparently. And she can't talk, or she'll ruin the magic for the 6 years of being able to break the spell. So she goes with them. She meets the king, and he says, "Oh, you are so lovely. I'm going to make you my wife." And because she can't speak to help her brothers, she makes no protest and she becomes this guy's wife. Fairy tales from the past are dark. So she can't talk to this guy. She never speaks to him. After a year, she has their first child. And his wicked stepmother, remember, this is a whole different king from her daddy, the king. So husband's stepmother, or mother, wicked mother, decides that she's not worthy of the king. She's not worthy of being a queen. So she's going to get rid of the child and wants to make him believe that his wife is an eater of human flesh, because when the first child comes into the world, the old woman carries it away, marks the queen's mouth with blood while she's sleeping, and tries to convince him of this evil. But he believes she is too tender and good to commit such a crime, so he does not do anything about it. They have another child, repeat the process. Again, convince that she'll make the king believe that his wife is a eater of human flesh. Takes the second child. Round 3, a third time, this happens. And she will not say anything in her defense because she's trying to be quiet for the brothers. She needs to transform back into people. So, because she will not say anything, she is sentenced to suffer death by fire. This timeline, of course, coincides with the end of the 6 years, so her execution by fire takes place on the last day of the 6 years when she cannot speak, and she's been sewing all the clothes for her brothers. Apparently, when she's getting ready to be burned alive, she brings these shirts with her and sees in the sky 6 swans flying towards her right as they're getting ready to light the flames. And somehow, as they come closer with rushing wings, she throws the shirts over them, except one that's missing a left sleeve because she ran out of time because, you know, she's going to be executed. And her brothers reappear and their swan skins fall away and they stand in their own flesh and blood. And one brother no longer has an arm because the left sleeve wasn't finished, and the now not burned queen, I guess she's not burning in the fire, goes up to her husband and is like, "Dearest husband, I may dare to speak and tell you that I am innocent and have been falsely accused." And they explain what happens with Mama and that the 3 children were taken and hidden away. She reconciles with the king, and they bind the wicked mommy to the fire instead on the stake and burn her instead. And then they live happily ever after with 6 brothers in peace and joy. It does not ever go back to what happened to the original king and his wicked wife who caused all this to begin with. That's the end of the story. Trust me, I read this a couple times to make sure that I got everything in order, so that's not what happens in this. In this, it kind of is a mesh-up of the ballet and that mess. Odette doesn't have any siblings, and there's not multiple moms. It's just her parents. And then I stole some lore from the movie because I loved the movie as a child. So there is a prince, he's a lord in this, Lord Dima, and he is not our love interest. That would still be Raimundo. In this story, unfortunately, the Lord, so Prince Derek, he's our bad guy. And we do get some vengeance. There's some who hurt you in this, and I am all about that. I love the lore in that. We also get a teeny tiny bit of some Jack Frost references, and we get a little bit more of Wonderland and the Mad Queen. We get a little bit more of the Shadow Man and all the stuff that's going on with him. We get some looks, so Dad has some insights. We get more of Camelot, so Arthur and the Round Table. We meet some more characters in there and explore like their side of the stories and characters in the Legend of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. That's explored a little. And we also get to the point where we talk about the beanstalk. And that's important right at the end of the book. You'll see why if you read it. We go back a little bit and talk about Legs, who we meet in the first book. We talk about Legs and her a little bit. We talk about the North, the Frostlands. We talk a tiny bit about Icicle Pass. And we talk about a spindle, a magical spindle that might have a reference to a princess if you think about any of the lore. And that would have to do with book 3. So there's a bunch of fairy tales. Mainly it's Old Lady Who Lived in the Shoe and Swan Princess, Six of Swans. Very confusing story. You can actually look it up online and read the story. It is weird, but it was very in line with Grimm's fairy tales, and I really liked learning about those. So that's essentially everything that's going on in book 2. There's not as much various fairy tales. This one covers a lot of different fairy tales. This one, not so much. That's why it's smaller, because there was less to go over. In my head, when I'm thinking about what needs to happen in book 3, I'm thinking book 3 is going to probably be close to this size again or bigger, because I see a lot of things needing to happen in book 3 to set up book 4 and 5. Book 3, we can talk about that one a tiny bit because this technically releases on release day. So book 3, after these two, is called Across the Frostlands, and it is going to be a Jack Frost and Ice Queen retelling. On that note, neither Jack Frost or the Snow Queen are Grimm's fairy tales. I learned that. I did not know that there is no Jack Frost Grimm's fairy tale retelling. I thought he was the Grimm's version. He's not. He's the embodiment of winter, and he's kind of mentioned in stories, but he doesn't specifically have his own. So I gotta work out how I want to like tie all that in. But the Snow Queen is definitely a Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale, and it's a word I can't say. I'll put it up here if I remember to. So that'll get tied into the story. I think I haven't written it yet, so it could change. So don't come at me if this doesn't happen. But I think it's also going to be a loose retelling of Sleeping Beauty. I think there's going to be some aspects of that. It'll have a little more to do with Wonderland than Beneath Swan Lake did. This was kind of on its own. It's very much focused on Raymundo and Odette and just like a tiny side plot of things happening between Wonderland and Camelot. So it'll be a lot more looking at that, and also the Frostlands and Mystica are kind of like their own thing. They do their own stuff because it's freezing up there and nobody goes. So they're kind of their own entity. They exist on their own in Mystica and don't really do a lot with the other kingdoms in the country. We'll look at Wonderland a little more. Also going to do some Beanstalk stuff because that got left off. So it'll be part of the next book. We'll learn a little more about the Shadow Man, who I'm so excited for. Spoiler, he'll be book 5. And that's all. There's not a whole lot of fairy tales to cover in this book, but I love it. It's a little more romance than this book. This book I think is heavy into like setting up the plot and like different fairy tales and how Mystica kind of works. This book's a little, I think it's a little easier of a read, and it's a little more romancy. The spice happens a little earlier in this book. These are still not spice heavy like the Billionaires books or the Sins and Secrets books, but they are fun. So stay tuned. I'm gonna probably talk about book 3 at some point ahead of the actual release date, because I like to talk. Like book 3, I know our Reaper, he has long white hair because that's what I want him to look like. And Sashomaru from Inuyasha is forever gonna be my epitome of what a long-haired white-haired man should look like. My bad. But I love Sashomaru and I need him to be the embodiment of something. And I don't know what the princess is gonna look like. I think she has dark hair, just to make it different. Well, that's all I have right now. So if you want to learn some lore about the Swan Princess and Grim Reaper and how they come together, and some Old Lady Who Lives in the Shoes stories, and a whole lot of drama, then check that out. It released on the 14th, March 14th, so today. So that's all for now. Next week and the week after, I know one week I'm gonna go over fairytales. Not fairytales. Let's cut it here. So my next videos, I'm gonna go over like comparing my signing I did at the beginning of March, which was Books and Brews Chapter 2. Great signing. I did really good there. Still not the most I've ever made in an event, but for what it was, for the price I paid, for the books I had, and for the time that was put into it, like on my side, it was only 3 hours and I did it all that day. Very worthwhile. Loved that. And I'm going to Dirty Daddy's. I'm leaving on Wednesday. So I'll be doing like a comparison probably, and also going to Dirty Daddy's because I haven't been to Vegas in a while. So we're gonna go look up a street that's in the Nevada volume and some bookstores and have a good time. And I can't wait. So thank you so much for watching and following along. If you have any questions, if you want to talk about how crazy some of those fairy tales from the past are, go ahead and comment below. Otherwise, I'll be back next week again to talk some more and yammer and yap with you. I hope that your week is full of good reading and bookish things, and until next time.